from sepsis and TB to something a little more common for all pathologists is biochemistry. And subject of interferences is something which I think we still don't know completely well. And we have an expert here with us, Dr. Chakravarti. He is the Chief Consultant, Department of Clinical Biochemistry at the Peerless Hospital and B.K. Roy Research Center in Kolkata. He is a postgraduate in biochemistry from West Bengal and also a fellow of the National Academy of Clinical Biochemistry, USA, and also a professional member of the AACC besides other bodies. He has numerous publications to his credit, and he's also been awarded the prestigious AACC Outstanding Speaker Award in 2013. I invite Dr. Chakravarti to share his experiences of monoclonal interferences in clinical chemistry.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for the kind words. And today's talk is specifically on the monoclonal protein interference. I'm sure you are all about your interferences and interference, you are all aware of it. But we'll not take anything like interferences from our spouses, interferences from our bosses, because I don't have any solution to it. But I'll specifically deal with the interferences that we face in daily laboratory practice. So here is a case study of a 58-year-old man who basically presented with a shortness of breath, weakness, and anemia. And the peripheral smear showed a normocytic normochromic type, and his WBC counts were absolutely normal. So, he had a bit of renal impairment, and that is the reason why he was, after doing an urine albumin, we referred the patient for a renal consult. And, the nephrologist, these are the standard tests. When they have the creatinine result, they give his calcium, phosphate, and uric acid. So, this is what the results came out to be. Everything was roughly within range, except a phosphate of 28.4 milligram per DL. And I was a very new consultant at that time. I had never seen such a result. So would you like to try that? What might be the cause of such extreme hyperphosphatemia? Okay, doesn't matter. Before I answer this question, let's deal with spurious lab results. Whatever specialty of lab medicine we work in, be it pathology, microbiology, biochemistry, spurious results, values, abnormal values are a part of our life. And the challenge remains is to identify and not letting those results being released. And there is something which I would like to focus on is the reputational risk. Because a lab is known for its report. And if you can't explain something which is bizarre, it's very difficult to save our skin. So reputational risk is something which is present in every lab. Now, our job as a laboratory physician is to prevent such results from being released. Now, we have eminent pathologists here, and I don't need to cover much on monoclonal gammopathies, except that they are basically a disorder of a single immunoglobulin secreting clone of a plasma cell population, and they are of IgA, IgM, IgA type. G and A types are the most common. There are other disorders which are also associated, which include amyloidosis, Waldenstrom's, and certain lymphoproliferative malignancies also secrete monoclonal proteins. Now, coming on to my first case, this was a case of actually a patient suffering from IgG kappa monoclonal gammopathy. Now, IgG kappa is very well known to interfere with the conventional phosphate assays that we all use. Whatever equipment you are using is liable to such kind of weird interferences. And as a result of this specific IgG kappa, it resulted in an absolutely incorrect phosphate result. Basically, after reading literature, we were able to diagnose and we were able to reflexly test for a total protein albumin followed by electrophoresis. And we made a diagnosis of multiple myeloma, which was later confirmed with a bone marrow just on the basis of this abnormal result. So, now let me take you back to history, and can I have this video, please? I'll just take you 50 years ago to Los Angeles County Hospital, which had one of the world's first
professor at the University of Southern California in 1966. The quality of the film is not great, but it does depict much of what was going on in clinical chemistry during that era. This is the main building of the LA County General Hospital. The workload for chemistry was carried out, nearly all of it on Technicon Autoanalyzer 1s. Each AA1 was assembled on a small trolley with all the reagents for a particular assay on the shelf underneath. Each one could be disconnected and moved away. Here you see Dr. Sterling disconnecting the power and the data cord from the AA1 so that it can be taken out of service or wheeled away for maintenance.
So this is what was 50 years ago. The principles of automation have changed. But what hasn't changed is the basic principle of chemistry. Our reagents remain roughly the same. All what has happened is that we have customized things on a miniature automated smaller platforms. Now that was the autoanalyzer SMA A1. You know, that one single trolley could do just one assay. The principles of phosphate assay till date remains the same what was used in the Technicon. Analyzers have changed, basic chemistry hasn't changed. Now why these cases of spurious interferences in cases of monoclonal gammopathy have turned up in literature in the last 20 years was that previously all the analyzers like SMA and the later ones used to assay analytes after deproteinizing them. So this protein, we used to measure things in a protein-free filtrate. So we never saw such kind of interferences in the 60s, in the 70s. Only when we started using serum or plasma directly, we found that, from 1980 onwards, you will see all these reports. They were present previously, but were never picked up because we assayed everything in a protein-free filtrate. Now, here is what happens inside an autoanalyzer. The one is just the phosphomolybdate reagent in a cuvette. What happens when we add an IgG kappa sample to it? You can see the white precipitate being formed here. And it's an enlarged, this is the large precipitate which is formed. It forms in a flash of a second. The analyzer reads it as an absorbent spike and gives you incorrect phosphate results. Now, pseudo-hyperphosphatemia is very common. It's quite common. Up to 1 in 4 samples of patients of IgG kappa monoclonal gammopathy, and IgG kappa is one of the commonest, can show such kind of interferences. Now, you cannot predict this interference because at what concentration of total protein you will have this interference remains unknown. There is one more aspect, that is pseudo-hypophosphatemia, where instead of having a very falsely elevated value, we get a lower value. That is known as pseudo-hypophosphatemia. You just, in my case, I got a bizarre value. But had the value been reported as something like 9.5, 10.5, I would have released the result. If the result was a low value, 2.5, I would have possibly released the result without knowing this. So we need to be very aware of such things can happen in patients with multiple myeloma. And all the wet chemistry platforms that we use, whichever is the manufacturer, are susceptible to this interference. It is across board. Now here is one more interesting case. The cases that I will show you are either, all of them are from my lab or are published from our hospital. So this was a case in which we reported a bilirubin. We found the total bilirubin was raised and a direct bilirubin was normal. And an adult patient, it almost looks like that he's having hemolytic anemia. Now, the commonest culprit in spurious bilirubin results is the total bilirubin which is usually affected is either IgG lambda or in some cases it is IgG-M. So, bilirubin is the second commonest analyte which is subjected to interference. Now, this is what in figure 1a, the first 1a is a normal sample, B is an icteric sample, and C is a sample which contains, it's of a myeloma patient. Now, this is the total bilirubin reagent. What happens in A is that there is no color formation. This is true bilirubin. The correspondingly, you can see the purplish color which is developed. What happens in a myeloma protein is that there is no color formation. But due to, again, that precipitation effect of that monoclonal immunoglobulin, we get haziness. And again, the analyzer is fooled, and it reads a weird absorbance, and we get a total bilirubin of 18. However, when you look at the sample, you will see that it is crystal clear. This is one more case that we encountered in a patient with Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia. In Waldenstrom, typically IgM type immunoglobulin is expressed, and the immunoglobulin levels are very high. So we got a case of spuriously low HDL levels of 11 milligram per DL. When we used a different methodology, we found that the HDL cholesterol was actually 40. Now, it is not always that all wet chemistry system, all liquid chemistry based systems will behave abnormally. It is something which is specific for the assay, but all of them are subjected to these kind of interferences for different assays.
What was the alternate method you used?
In this case of the HDL one you are talking about, HDL one we found the interference on a Beckman-Coulter system, and the Roche system gave the right result. In the bilirubin system, it was very, very interesting case. In the bilirubin case, Roche's, I actually do not like to disclose the names of the company, but it was the same manufacturer. On one of its system, there was interference. On the higher end model, there was no interference. It was because the same manufacturer has two different blanking principles for each different analyzer. So one was interfering, the other wasn't. And in all these cases, we verified, particularly in the phosphate and I'll come later on, we actually collaborated this with dry chemistry findings. We used the ortho method for this. I'll come to that later on. I'll also show some strategies by which you can detect these things. Now, this is a very interesting a diagnosis of a light chain myeloma, which you can see from the immunofixation that the only band is there in the electrophoresis lane and in the lambda lane. So it's basically a lambda light chain myeloma in which a CRP was done and it showed a value of more than 300. So reflexly we got a procalcitonin dust which was virtually undetectable. Counts were normal, blood cultures were normal. So many tests, so much money, so much time wasted just because it was showing interference with the CRP assay. Now, you must be very aware that, patients with myeloma occasionally develop hypercalcemia. So we have this criteria CRAB, that is hypercalcemia, renal insufficiency, anemia, and bony lytic lesions. So the diagnosis of myeloma is not just based on the bone marrow findings, but also on the CRAB. So this was, hypercalcemia is very common, particularly in IgA type myeloma. So there was a known, recently diagnosed IgA myeloma. My pathology colleagues had reported on the bone marrow, lytic lesions were found. We had done an electrophoresis, a big M band for IgA, 4.8 gram per DL, and we reported the calcium as 19.3. So everything looked fine. Everything looked fine, except my physician, he said that, look, in 19.3, the patient should be really drowsy. I mean, he has myeloma, but he doesn't look that drowsy. Then it stuck to me that we are using the best possible method on arsenazole. So I consulted a friend and we did this assay on, we used these two methods. We used a dry chemistry platform for this, and we used an OCPC method, and the result was 11. So, we all know that patients with myelomas have hypercalcemia. Now, to treat or not to treat, had my physician not expressed that uncertainty that he doesn't look drowsy, what do you think? I went and saw the patient. He was eating his lunch. And really at that time it struck me that something can be wrong. A 19.3 calcium patient really looks drowsy. Now, this is a wonderful paper, it's freely available on the net. It was published by the American Journal of Clinical Pathology. You can go through this paper. It deals with the different kinds of interferences, both on the hematology front, from the microbiology front and the biochemistry front, what hematologic malignancies can do to different assays. So it's a very long list. I have only highlighted the ones which I have found, which are relatively more common. So you can have problems with sodium, calcium, even with glucose, uric acid, CRP, albumin, ASO titer, and what are the mechanisms of such spurious results, and which are the instruments by which this problem took place. This is a very good article by Dr. Dalal. He's a pathologist of Indian origin. Dr. Bokul Dalal's article in the American Journal of Clinical Pathology, 2009. Now, I've all scared you enough, so now I need to give some solutions as to what you can do. Look, for things like bilirubin, you need to see the sample once. Just have a look at the sample. Does it look like, is it icteric? Does it look like really the patient has a total bilirubin of 15? If your analyzer, very few of us use this LIH or the lipemia icterus hemolysis index, because in Western country, my visits to Europe and US has taught me that all the labs there use this index judiciously. We are bound to use it. There will be analyte specific indices which will be programmed on the analyzer, and the ISO 15189 states that any lab which is reporting results, if the integrity of the sample was compromised, but still due to medical urgency you have to report the result, we need to add a disclaimer stating that there was lipemia, there was icterus, by which the results might not be that accurate. Now, the way we do it, most of us do it in our lab, is by visual inspection. And trust me, assessing hemolysis by visual inspection is absolutely a relatively useless method. It's already fossiled in the Western world, but still, due to cost involved, a large number of analyzers have to use specifically reagents. Again, I heard 12 presentations in the last 2 days, and every presenter has actually occurred one term always, and that is cost. So lab medicine and cost is coming hand to hand. So we are not in a position to spend so much. So, it is best that we have this LIH index. If possible, we see the results. We rerun the assay. We run the assay once or twice and see that whether the variation is expected or not. The result, which was 15, might come as 14.8 because our analyzers are very precise these days. A sample of 15 should not come 10 as the second time, and monoclonal protein interferences are erratic and sporadic. Once it will come as 20, the other time it will come as 12. So the variation will be very high. You can identify by running it twice. This is the cheapest and the best method. I have picked up most such cases. Run a linearity on the sample. Make serial dilution, direct, half dilution, 1 in 4, 4x dilution, 8x dilution, as much as you can cover the measuring range. If you see that there is loss of linearity, is absolutely haywire, suspect interference. By this, you can not only pick up monoclonal protein-based interferences, but also interferences from drugs, interferences from the HAMA, animal antibodies, mouse antibodies. So this is the cheapest and the best available technique. And of course, this is also equally good. Measure the analyte using a different method. If you have a different method in your lab, or you can refer the sample outside, which has a different method. And last but not least, the golden rule is that correlate it with clinical information always. Now, this is one technology we use in our hospital, which is relatively very insulated from it's a dry platform. Different manufacturers make it with, we use the orthoclinical platform for our dry chemistry system. And the beauty of this is that it contains a spreading and a filtering layer, which actually separates the proteins from the main sample. So these interfering proteins are removed by it, and depending on the assays, these assays are usually insulated from monoclonal protein interferences. And the principle of this assay is not the conventional Beer-Lambert's law, but a reflectance spectrophotometry. Now, what are the, we all don't have dry chemistry platforms in our hospital. So what are the other techniques that we can use? We can deproteinize samples. Now, the conventional techniques of deproteinization were salting out methods, trichloroacetic acid precipitation, ultrafiltration, and dialysis. Either these are very expensive, you can have that Amicon filters for this. This is a very corrosive acid, and I would not like to keep it in my lab. And the other one is, I have used this method very commonly, that is using a polyethylene glycol-based precipitation. But, not all assays will work using these tools. Only if the test that you are doing is not hampered by the precipitation technique. I mean, it will work very well for things like aqueous soluble things like phosphate, uric acid, bilirubin. These will work very well. But if you are dealing with proteins, they will also get precipitated. So the analyte of interest will be lost. It will not work with things like CRP and HDL. But for the common ones, this will work well. So you can use any of these techniques. Now, this is a paper that we published, I and Professor Kalner from Karolinska Institute, we published this paper. We collected a couple of 13, 14 cases of IgG type hyperphosphatemias. We then used a PEG-based precipitation method. We used 25% PEG, very easy to prepare, very cheap. 250 microliter of serum, 250 microliters of PEG solution. We mixed it, we centrifuged it, used the supernatant, and multiplied the results by 2. And simultaneously, we used the orthoclinical diagnostic VITROS platform, and there was an excellent correlation between our lab-developed PEG precipitation technique versus that of the dry chemistry method. And you can keep PEG solution. It cost just 500 rupees for one bottle, and I'm sure it's going to last 5 years. So this is a very good technique by which you can correct this monoclonal protein interferences. Now, as you all know, that all indirect ISC methods in patients with myeloma and very high total protein, particularly more than 12 gram per DL, all indirect ISC methods give a low value. Now, this is one more problem that monoclonal proteins cause. However, if you are using a direct ISC method in your lab, you are relatively insulated. Now, I was talking about monoclonal proteins in the analytical phase. Now, I will come to the pre-analytics aspect of monoclonal proteins. Now, this was an interesting observation that I made. We were using gel tubes, and my technologies brought me to notice that some samples were not separating. We had seen 1 or 2 cases which even on recentrifugation or collecting a second sample and centrifuging it at a higher speed did not separate. It was always that the gel was below, and then the packed cells, and then the serum. We could assay, we could make aliquots of the serum and then run those samples. But, we discovered that most of such cases, we got 21 such cases, out of which 16 of them turned out to be monoclonal gammopathies. Now, we published this paper just highlighting this aspect that labs have a look at the sample. And this is the data of all the 16 patients. You will see that most were full-blown myelomas, and even some were MGUS, some were Waldenström's. So out of 21 cases, 16 turned out to have monoclonal gammopathies. And there are at least 4 patients in this, 2 of MGUS and 2 myelomas, where even the diagnosis was not made. We made the diagnosis by just looking at the sample and running a total protein and albumin and finding a reversal of ratio. So now coming on to the cost, the cost issues and other things. So, this was a difficult choice. I would like you to help me. I made this choice some years ago. We had 2 total protein reagents. We had an open channel analyzer, and both the total protein assay was done by Bio-Rad. Evaluation of both revealed a CB of 1.8 here and the 1.9. No EQA outliers in any of them. Pack size same. One cost per test is 5 rupee and one is 1 rupee 25 paisa. So which one do you choose? Linearity is roughly fine. Equal for both. Let me tell you, I chose this one because, I have also the management to please, so they'll be happy. We chose this one. We used the cheaper reagent for 3 years, and then the fun starts. Now, this is a patient, a 50-year-old woman who was admitted for a sudden onset sensorineural deafness. So, physicians like to do some basic workup, and an LFT was sent. We reported the total protein here as 10.1 with an albumin of 3.5. I usually personally review all such results, and we put a comment on the report. I just put a comment, marked albumin globulin ratio reversal noted, advised serum protein electrophoresis. I was already my 4th year as a consultant, so already I have become pretty popular. So my physician called me up that you have written. I said that, okay, I think 10.1, it has to be myeloma. Well, that's great. You have made diagnosis of myeloma before by looking at samples. So, okay, it doesn't matter. We send an serum protein electrophoresis. We send an immunofixation. We send a serum calcium. He said, do you send a kappa lambda ratio? I said, okay, let's wait. Let the SP report come. And this is what I see on the electrophoresis. Absolutely normal electrophoresis. I yell at my technologist, you have run the incorrect sample. Now she is a very elderly lady, she runs it twice, same pattern. And believe of mom, I think something fell on my head that day. And the physician was about to request a bone marrow. A needle would have gone inside the bone, sucking out the marrow because of my incorrect result. I had chosen a cheaper brand kit. The only problem was that both are Bio-Rads, but the tartrate concentration in those 2 reagents were different. So, in the treatment of sensorineural deafness, we use 2 drugs. One is dextran and one is corticosteroid. Now, this was a case of dextran-induced spurious hyperproteinemia, where the patient looked like a case of myeloma because of our incorrect protein results. We, on our same analyzer, we use the manufacturer's reagent. We use multiple other leading brands. Everywhere the protein came out to be either 6.9 gram per DL or 7 gram per DL. Now, we wasted at least 10,000 rupees of the patient. What would have we had gone for an invasive procedure based on this result? So, before choosing interference, before choosing reagents, it is actually not possible for us to validate interference. It is not possible. But at least we can be aware of such problems, and we can at least read the product insert to see whether they are comparable or not. This is an interesting publication in December 2014 by a Spanish group, which shows that you need to be aware about interferences because occasionally you can pick up rare diseases. And if we need laboratory medicine as a profession, if it needs to grow, we need to be one step ahead than the physician. We need to tell him something extra which he already doesn't know. So this can be interesting in that aspect. So that's all what I want to present to you today, and I just wanted to make aware that with all modern assays that we have, we are going to face interference. We should be aware about it, and particularly in all patients that, whether your pathology colleague or in some other department which is hematology, they are diagnosing a monoclonal gammopathy patient, please take note of that and have a look at the entire results of clinical chemistry. We routinely do this in our hospital because I have faced the problem multiple times. So we actually, any patients being diagnosed with myeloma, I have a look at the entire chemistry panel, whether anything is suspicious or not. And always get back to the patient, get back to the physician to know that how the patient is doing. And always check the manufacturer's kit insert for the possible interferences, because all the manufacturers have validated them in the best possible research institutes. They usually give a lot of information which you might find, say, once a year or twice a year. So please read them properly, and I hope my presentation can make you more aware towards this problem. And thank you. You can note down my email if you have any further queries or you want to discuss any such case. I'm always open to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We find a lot of interferences happening due to LIH index, which we agree. We pack inserts say the same. But when it comes to monoclonal protein, we don't get much information in the pack insert as such. So are there any other conditions which we should be looking out for apart from monoclonal?
Ma'am, which assay do you use? Oh, I mean, which platform do you use?
It would be incorrect to say now, but we use wet chemistry.
Yeah, you use wet chemistry, but all leading manufacturers, they don't mention all. They usually have IgM specifically mentioned in most of their, a large number of assays. But again, they, it is something that you need to be aware about.
Any other condition which we need to be aware of and normally is not seen in the pack insert? Any other condition apart from paraproteins?
From multiple. It
What
can
I'm
be
going to
drugs.
propose is that next year we'll have a longer session with you. That much I can assure you on that. So you are definitely invited next year for sure. So please keep your
Thank
calendar
you so
blocked.
much. Thank you.
This was a fantastic session. Thank you so much for that. I know we'll have so many questions, but we can catch up with you afterwards.
Please note down my free. I'll reply you by email.
Ironically, or by poetic justice, the person who's going to felicitate you is Dr. Krishnan.
Oh.
And he is from Orthoclinical Diagnostics. Thank you so much, Dr. Chakravarti. Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon? For assays which are
You want to answer that, Dr.
do
K?
not have that separating layer for protein, say you are measuring a CRP, even if you are doing it on a dry chemistry platform, does not have the protein removing thing. So there might be problem. However, for a dry chemistry platform, the common things like bilirubin, phosphate, uric acid are all protected, but not for those analytes which are itself proteins or the reagents contains proteins. Thank you.
Dr. K?
Thank you so much, Doctor. Excellent. Thank you. Let us hear from Dr. Sudeep Tagore.
Thank you so much. Thank you.